I got home around 4:45 on an ordinary weekday evening, completely exhausted after covering someone else's shift at the distribution center where I worked as a floor supervisor. My employee badge felt like it weighed 10 pounds against my chest. All I wanted was a hot shower, silence, and whatever leftovers were sitting in the fridge. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the lights were already on inside the house. Through the front windows, I could hear women laughing and talking over each other. I unlocked the front door quietly, not because I was sneaking around, mostly because I was too drained to make any noise. Then I heard my wife's voice cut sharply through the conversation. "Honestly, I give this marriage maybe 12 more months. He's just not on my level anymore." I froze in the entryway. 4 of her friends were sprawled across our living room furniture, wine bottles and half-empty glasses scattered across the coffee table. The second she finished speaking, they burst into laughter like she had just delivered the funniest joke of the night. "You've already been way too patient with him," one of them said. "Seriously," another added, shaking her head. "I would have left a long time ago." My wife sat there in the center of it all like the host of her own talk show, casually sipping wine while everyone validated her. "I keep hoping he'll improve," she said dramatically before letting out an exaggerated sigh that sent the room into another fit of giggles. For a few seconds I couldn't move. My heart pounded violently against my ribs, but strangely, my mind became crystal clear. It was one of those moments when the truth you've been avoiding suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. I stepped into the living room. The laughter died instantly. Every head turned toward me. "Wow," I said calmly, even surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Sounds like a fascinating conversation." The color drained from my wife's face. "Oh, you're home early." Shift ended sooner than expected. I glanced around the room. Lucky timing. Almost missed the entertainment. Nobody spoke. I looked directly at her. "So we've got 12 months left, huh?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. "That's not what I meant. I was just—" "Why wait 12 months?" I interrupted quietly. "Let's end it now." The silence that followed was suffocating. One of her friends slowly lowered her wine glass onto the table. "What?" my wife finally whispered. "You heard me." I pulled out my phone and casually checked the time as if I had somewhere more important to be. "You want out?" "Fine. There's the door, or I'll leave. Your choice." The confidence that had filled the room a minute earlier completely disappeared. None of her friends could even look at me anymore. "You're being ridiculous," my wife snapped, though her trembling voice betrayed her. I was venting. Everyone vents. "Venting?" I nodded slowly. "He's not on my level anymore." "That's venting?" I turned toward her friends. "Did I hear that correctly? I'm beneath her now?" Still, no one answered. I turned around and headed upstairs. Behind me, I heard my wife scrambling after me, her heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor. "Where are you going?" "Packing." "You cannot be serious." I stopped halfway up the stairs and looked back at her. "You just told your friends our marriage is basically over. Why wouldn't I be serious?" "That's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said." I continued upstairs while she followed me into the bedroom, talking non-stop. According to her, I was overreacting. It was just girl talk. I was being dramatic. I barely listened. I grabbed my gym bag from the closet and started throwing in clothes, socks, toiletries, and my phone charger. "This is insane," she said from the doorway. "You're throwing away 5 years over one comment." I zipped the bag shut and faced her. "You really think this is about one comment?" My voice stayed calm, but every word landed heavy. "You just spent the last hour humiliating me in front of your friends, laughing about how I'm no longer good enough for you." I picked up the bag. "And honestly, Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not good enough for someone who talks about her husband like that. So maybe we should both find better. Her expression cracked. I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? She had no answer. I walked downstairs. Her friends had already disappeared, leaving behind abandoned wine glasses and the stale smell of alcohol in the room. I grabbed my keys from the counter. "Where are you going?" she called from upstairs. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters. This is your home." I looked up at her standing at the top of the staircase. "No," I said quietly. "This is just a house where my wife thinks I'm beneath her. That's not the same thing." Then I walked out the door. I sat in my truck for a long moment with both hands gripping the steering wheel. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a dull ache in my chest. But underneath the anger and humiliation was something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in a very long time, I felt free. I started the engine and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I could see her standing frozen in the doorway under the warm glow of the living room lights. I never looked back again. The nearest motel sat just off the interstate, $49 a night. The room smelled like old carpet and industrial cleaner, but it had a bed, a lock on the door, and silence. That was enough. The moment I sat on the edge of the mattress, my phone started vibrating. Then again, and again. Every message was from her. "Please come home. We need to talk. You're acting childish. I'm sorry." "Okay, I'm really sorry." I flipped the phone face down and stared blankly at the wall. Tomorrow I'd figure out what came next. Tonight, I just needed to accept what had finally become undeniable. My marriage was over. If I was honest with myself, maybe it had been over for a long time. Tonight was simply the moment the illusion finally shattered. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. "He's just not on my level anymore." The words replayed over and over in my head like a broken recording. At some point near dawn, exhaustion finally dragged me under, but it didn't last long. My phone started vibrating violently across the motel nightstand at 6:15 in the morning. I groaned and reached for it. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, all from my wife. I rubbed my face and sat up slowly while the cheap motel coffee maker sputtered in the corner of the room. The air smelled stale, like burned coffee grounds and old air conditioning. I scrolled through the messages. At first, she was angry. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You completely overreacted. You walked out like a child." Then the tone shifted. "Please come home. We can fix this." "I'm sorry." Around 3 in the morning, the messages became desperate. "I didn't mean it. I love you." The last text, sent at 4:37 a.m., simply said, "Please." I stared at the screen for a long moment before tossing the phone beside me. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, washing the parking lot in pale orange light. A semi-truck idled near the interstate, while a tired-looking woman walked her dog past the motel office. The world kept moving. Funny how life does that even when yours feels like it just collapsed. I poured myself terrible motel coffee into a foam cup and sat back down on the edge of the bed. My work shirt from yesterday was wrinkled beyond saving, but I didn't care. I still had an 8 a.m. shift. Bills didn't stop because your marriage exploded overnight. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't my wife. The screen showed a different name. Monica, her best friend. The blonde woman who had been sitting on the far left side of the couch the night before. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered. "Hello?" "Hey." Monica's voice sounded nervous, quieter than usual. "Thanks for picking up." I leaned back against the wall. "This better be important." "It is." There was a brief silence before she spoke again. "Look, what happened last night, that wasn't just random venting." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. What do you mean? Another pause. She's been planning this for months. The words hit harder than I expected. I sat up straighter. Planning what exactly? The divorce. The cheap motel suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Monica exhaled shakily. She's been talking to a lawyer since February. She's been trying to figure out how to get the best possible settlement. I said nothing. My grip tightened around the coffee cup. She wanted you to leave first, Monica continued softly. That's why she kept pushing and pushing lately. The arguments, the cold behavior. Last night, she hesitated. I think she wanted you to snap. I stared at the stained motel wall across from me. She's been documenting everything too, Monica added. Writing down arguments, twisting stories, trying to paint you as neglectful or aggressive. A hollow feeling spread through my chest. So all of this was a setup? I think so. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning in my head. Why are you telling me this? Monica's voice softened. Because what she did last night was cruel. I closed my eyes. And because, she continued quietly, you've always been decent to us, to all of her friends. You didn't deserve to be humiliated like that. I stood up and walked toward the motel window. Outside, cars rushed along the interstate while the morning sky brightened above the city. Does she know you're calling me? God, no. Monica gave a nervous laugh. She'd lose her mind. I rested my forehead against the cool glass. What else? She's been collecting screenshots of your bank activity, Monica admitted, trying to claim you're secretive with money. She told her lawyer you've emotionally checked out of the marriage. I let out a bitter laugh. I pay every bill in that house. I know. She works part-time while I cover doubles every week. I know. Monica sighed heavily. That's not the version she's telling people. The anger inside me slowly shifted into something colder. Clearer. For the first time since leaving the house, the shock started wearing off. And underneath it, reality finally settled in. This hadn't been one careless conversation. This had been a strategy, a plan, a game I didn't even know I was playing. Listen, Monica said carefully. I recorded this call. I blinked. You what? I wanted proof in case she tried to deny any of it later. I'll send you the recording. Use it however you need to. I pulled the phone away from my ear slightly, stunned. You'd actually do that? Yes. Why? Because somebody should. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. Thank you. You need a lawyer, Monica said immediately. Today. Don't wait. I will. And don't go back there alone unless you absolutely have to. I looked around the tiny motel room, the wrinkled sheets, the faded curtains, the buzzing neon sign outside. Less than 12 hours ago, I thought my biggest problem was a humiliating conversation overheard by accident. Now, I realized my wife had been quietly preparing to destroy me for months. After we hung up, I sat motionless on the edge of the bed. A notification appeared seconds later. Monica had sent the audio file. I downloaded it immediately. Then another message came through, from my wife. Can we please talk? I stared at the words for a long time before finally typing back. No more games. 3 dots appeared instantly. What does that mean? I took a slow breath and replied. It means from now on we communicate through lawyers. Then I turned my phone off completely. For the first time since walking out of that house, I finally understood something. The marriage wasn't destroyed the moment I overheard her mocking me. It had been dying quietly long before that. I had just finally stopped pretending not to see it. I sat there for another 10 minutes after turning my phone off, staring at the blank television mounted on the motel wall. Everything felt unreal. Not the dramatic kind of unreal where people scream or throw things. It was quieter than that, colder. Like waking up one day and realizing the life you thought you had never actually existed the way you imagined. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I showered quickly, threw on yesterday's wrinkled work clothes, and grabbed my keys. The motel mirror made me look older than 34, dark circles under my eyes, tension carved into my face. By 7:20, I was driving toward the warehouse. Morning traffic crawled along the interstate, while local radio hosts joked about weather and sports scores like nothing in the world had changed. I envied that normalcy. At a red light, I turned my phone back on. The second it connected, messages flooded in again. Mostly from her. But there was one new text from an unknown number. Rachel. Another one of her friends from the wine night. I remembered her vaguely, the brunette sitting cross-legged near the armrest, the one who had laughed the loudest at one point before suddenly going quiet when I walked in. Her message was short. "I'm sorry about last night. What she did was wrong." I stared at it for a second before typing back. "Thanks." 3 dots appeared. "She's calling everyone this morning trying to control the story." That got my attention. "What kind of story?" Rachel replied almost immediately. "That you're emotionally abusive. That you abandoned her after she tried to communicate with you." I let out a hollow laugh under my breath. Of course. The light turned green, and I drove forward slowly while reading her next message. She wanted us to back her up if things got legal. My jaw tightened. "Are you going to?" A full minute passed before she answered. "No." I pulled into the warehouse parking lot just as the sun climbed over the loading docks. Workers in reflective vests moved between trailers while forklifts beeped somewhere in the distance. Normal life. Routine. For the first time all morning, I felt grateful for it. Inside, the smell of cardboard, machine oil, and burnt coffee hit me immediately. Familiar, predictable, safe. My supervisor, Mark, looked up from his clipboard when I walked in. "You look like hell," he said bluntly. "Appreciate that." He studied my face for a second longer before lowering his voice. "Everything okay?" I considered lying. Instead, I sighed. "Wife and I are separating." Mark's expression softened immediately. "Damn. Sorry, man." "Yeah." He nodded once. "You need a couple days off?" I shook my head. "No. Honestly, work's probably the only thing keeping me sane right now." "Well," he said carefully, "if you need anything, let me know." I thanked him and headed toward the floor. For the next few hours, I buried myself in work. Inventory reports, shipment checks, scheduling problems, anything that kept my brain occupied. But during lunch, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped outside behind the warehouse and called Monica again. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you said she's been planning this since February." "Yeah." "How serious was she?" Monica hesitated. "Pretty serious." I leaned against the brick wall behind the building. "What exactly was she saying?" Another pause. "She thought you were holding her back." The words landed like a punch. "She said she settled too young, that she deserved more." I laughed once, bitter and humorless. "More what?" She never really said. Monica sounded uncomfortable now. But she kept comparing her life to people online. Influencers, couples with expensive vacations, bigger houses, luxury stuff. "I think she convinced herself you were the reason she didn't have those things." I closed my eyes. 5 years. 5 years of overtime shifts, double weekends, skipped vacations, late bills. And somehow, in her version of reality, I had become the obstacle. She also thought, Monica continued carefully, that once the divorce happened, she'd come out ahead financially. That made me open my eyes. What does that mean? She thought she'd get the apartment, part of your savings, maybe alimony. Her lawyer apparently told her not to push too hard too fast. Monica sighed. That's why she wanted you to leave first. I rubbed my hand across my jaw slowly. Every conversation from the past 6 months suddenly replayed differently in my head. Every unnecessary argument, every cold shoulder, every complaint about money, every accusation that I wasn't ambitious enough. It all fit now. You still there? Monica asked quietly. Yeah. I stared out at the employee parking lot. I just can't believe someone could fake things for that long. She didn't fake all of it, Monica said softly. I think she did love you once. Once. Funny how painful one word could be. She just changed, Monica added. Or maybe she became more honest about who she really was. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she said something unexpected. She cried after you left, you know. I almost laughed again. Did she? Yeah, but honestly, Monica hesitated. I couldn't tell if she was upset about losing you or upset because her plan blew up in her face. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. The rest of the shift dragged by. Around 4 in the afternoon, Mark approached me while I was reviewing inventory sheets. There's a woman in the front office asking for you. My stomach dropped instantly. Who? He gave me a look that already said he knew. Your wife. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course she came here. I told her you were busy, Mark continued, but she refuses to leave. I exhaled slowly. Okay. As I walked toward the front office, I could already feel the tension building in my chest again. When I stepped through the doorway, she stood up immediately. Her makeup was smudged, eyes red, hair tied back messily like she'd barely slept. For a split second, seeing her like that hurt more than I expected. Then I remembered her laughing while telling her friends I wasn't good enough. The feeling disappeared. Can we talk? She asked softly. No. Please, you shouldn't be here. She stepped closer. You're seriously ending our marriage over one conversation? I stared at her in disbelief. One conversation? You know what I mean. No, I said quietly. Actually, I don't. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Monica talked to you, didn't she? I said nothing. That traitor. Stop! My voice came out sharper than intended. She didn't betray you. She just told me the truth. My wife crossed her arms defensively. You're seriously believing her over me? I'm believing what I heard with my own ears. Her expression shifted again, frustration replacing sadness. You walked out! After hearing my wife publicly humiliate me. You embarrassed me too. I stared at her for several seconds. Then I realized something. She still didn't get it. Not really. Even now, she was more focused on how this situation affected her than what she had actually done. You know what the worst part is? I asked quietly. She blinked. What? I would have done anything for you. For the first time since I'd walked into the office, she looked genuinely shaken. I continued. I worked overtime until my body hurt because I thought we were building something together. I ignored every sign that you stopped respecting me because I loved you. My throat tightened slightly. But the second you thought you deserved better, I shook my head slowly. You turned me into a problem to solve. She looked away. That's not fair. It's true. Silence filled the office. Finally, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding ring. I hadn't taken it off until now. For a moment, I just stared at it resting in my palm. 5 years. Promises. Plans. Sacrifices. Then I set it gently on the front desk between us. Her breath caught. I'm done, I said quietly. And this time, when I walked away, she didn't follow me. I expected her to call after that. Expected more texts, more emotional speeches, more accusations. But for the rest of the evening, my phone stayed silent. And somehow, that silence felt worse. I drove back to the motel with the radio off, one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel while the city lights blurred past the windows. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to slow down. The wedding ring was gone now. That tiny circle of metal had sat on my hand for 5 years, and I'd removed it in less than 5 seconds. Funny how quickly a life can split into before and after. Back at the motel, I kicked off my boots and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. The room looked even smaller tonight. Beige walls, faded curtains, a humming air conditioner fighting a losing battle against the summer heat. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the carpet. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. "Hello?" A man's voice responded immediately. "Is this Daniel Carter?" My stomach tightened. "Yes. This is Gregory Mills. I represent your wife." There it was. Lawyers. Reality becoming official. I leaned back slowly against the wall. "What do you want?" I was hoping we could discuss the current situation calmly before things escalate unnecessarily. The polished tone in his voice instantly irritated me. "Pretty sure things already escalated." A brief pause. "Your wife informed me you left the marital residence voluntarily yesterday evening." There it was. The wording, carefully chosen. "I left after she publicly humiliated me in front of her friends," I said flatly. "I understand emotions are high right now." "No," I interrupted. "You understand her version." Silence. Then the lawyer cleared his throat lightly. "Mr. Carter, my client would prefer to resolve this privately and respectfully." I almost laughed. Respectfully. That word coming from her side felt absurd. What exactly is she asking for? "She believes a temporary separation may be beneficial while both parties evaluate the future of the marriage." Translation. She was panicking because things weren't going according to plan. "She's had months to evaluate it already," I replied coldly. The line went quiet again. Interesting. He hadn't expected me to know that. "Mr. Carter, I know about February," I said calmly. "I know about the documentation, the strategy, the attempts to push me out first." That silence stretched much longer. When Gregory spoke again, his voice had changed slightly, more cautious now. "I see." "Yeah," I said. "You do." I stood up and walked toward the motel window. "So here's how this is going to work. I'm getting my own lawyer tomorrow. From now on, all communication goes through them." "Daniel." "Good night." I hung up before he could finish. For several seconds, I just stood there breathing slowly. Then I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the entire thing finally felt ridiculous. 5 years together, and now lawyers were calling motel rooms at night trying to control the narrative. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. This time it was Monica. "You okay?" I typed back. "Her lawyer just called me." 3 dots appeared instantly. Oh my God. "She's moving fast." Another pause. Then, "Be careful. Seriously." I stared at the message for a moment before responding. Too late for careful. I tossed the phone onto the bed and rubbed both hands over my face. Tomorrow I needed a lawyer. Tomorrow I needed to figure out finances. Tomorrow I needed to decide whether I was going back to the apartment for the rest of my stuff. Tomorrow. Everything was tomorrow. But tonight, I was just tired. Completely tired. I lay back against the stiff motel pillow and closed my eyes. For the first time in 2 days, no anger came. No rage. No humiliation, just grief. Not even grief for the marriage itself.
Grief for the version of it I thought was real.
The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. No calls, no texts, no drama, just silence. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment before finally grabbing my wallet. Inside was an old business card Jake from work had given me months earlier during his own divorce. Thomas Brennan, family law attorney. At the time, I remembered joking with him about it in the break room. Hopefully I'll never need this. Jake had laughed bitterly. Everybody says that. I stared at the card for several seconds before dialing the number. A receptionist answered almost immediately. Brennan and Associates, how may I help you? I cleared my throat. I need to schedule a consultation. Of course. Is this regarding divorce or separation? The word still hit like a punch. Divorce, I said quietly. She spoke gently, professionally. We have an opening at 4:30 this afternoon. I'll take it. After hanging up, I felt strangely calmer, like taking action had finally stopped the free fall. I showered, got dressed, and headed to work again. Halfway there, my phone buzzed with another message from Rachel. She's furious Monica talked. I frowned. What happened? Rachel replied, she found out this morning. They had a huge fight. A second message appeared right after. I don't think their friend group is on her side anymore. That surprised me more than it should have. Then another message came. She told people you abandoned her after she tried to save the marriage. Monica exposed everything. I stared at the screen at a red light. The lies were unraveling faster than she could control them. For someone who had spent months planning every detail, she suddenly seemed completely unprepared for the possibility that other people might tell the truth. At work, I buried myself in tasks again until 4 o'clock finally arrived. Brennan's office sat downtown in an older brick building, above a dentist's office and across from a coffee shop. The hallway smelled faintly of paper, dust, and burnt coffee. A receptionist led me into a conference room. A few minutes later, Thomas Brennan walked in. Mid-50s, gray hair, sharp eyes behind rectangular glasses. The kind of man who looked impossible to surprise. He shook my hand firmly. So, he said as he sat down across from me, opening a legal pad, tell me what's going on. And for the next hour, I told him everything. The humiliation, the motel, Monica's phone call, the lawyer, the planning that started months ago. Brennan listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes down. When I finally finished, he leaned back slightly in his chair. Well, he said calmly, your wife made one major mistake. I frowned. What's that? She underestimated you. That was the first moment since all of this started that I felt something close to hope. Brennan folded his hands on the table and studied me carefully for a moment. First, he said, I need you to understand something clearly. You are not the first decent man who's walked into this office blindsided. I let out a quiet breath. Feels pretty stupid. No, he replied immediately. It feels human. That hit harder than I expected. He flipped open the legal pad again. Now, I need facts, not emotions. We build this case with documentation, timelines, finances, and evidence. Understand? Yeah. Good. Start from the beginning. So I did. I explained our marriage, the apartment, my job at the warehouse, her part-time boutique work, the bills I covered, the overtime shifts, the growing distance over the past year. Then I told him about Monica, the recordings, the messages, the plan to make me leave first. Brennan's pen stopped moving. Do you still have the audio file? I backed it up twice. Excellent. Email it to me before you leave. He leaned back slightly. That recording changes things. How? Because it establishes intent. I frowned. Intent? Your wife wasn't simply unhappy in the marriage, Brennan explained. According to what you've told me, she was strategically attempting to position herself for financial advantage during a divorce. Hearing someone else say it out loud made my stomach twist. It sounded even uglier when framed plainly. She already has a lawyer, I said quietly. I figured as much. She started months ago. That also doesn't surprise me. He removed his glasses briefly and rubbed the bridge of his nose. People become very different when money, ego, and resentment get involved. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Brennan straightened in his chair again. Okay, important question. Did you officially move out? No. I've been staying at a motel since Wednesday night. Good. He pointed his pen toward me. Do not abandon the residence entirely yet. That matters legally. So what do? You return periodically. Gather belongings, check mail, maintain presence. You do not surrender the home voluntarily unless advised. I nodded slowly. Everything about this felt surreal. Like I'd accidentally stepped into someone else's life. Brennan continued asking questions. Bank accounts, savings, vehicles, retirement funds, debt. When I mentioned her credit cards, his eyebrows lifted slightly. How much debt? Maybe 7,000 total. In whose name? Hers. Who's been paying it? I hesitated. Mostly me. He gave me a long look but didn't comment immediately. Instead, he wrote something down. You'd be surprised, he finally said, how often one spouse quietly carries the entire marriage financially, while the other slowly detaches emotionally. That sentence sat heavily in the room, because it was true, not just financially, emotionally too. I had carried everything for a long time without realizing it. Brennan closed the folder. Here's what's going to happen next. We document everything from this point forward. Every text, every call, every interaction. Okay. You do not argue emotionally over messages. You do not threaten. You do not react impulsively. I won't. Good. Because if she's been building a narrative for months, the last thing we do is hand her ammunition. I rubbed my jaw slowly. She already tried telling people I abandoned her. That's predictable. He slid a business card across the table toward me. Starting now, all communication goes through me, if possible. I picked up the card. Thomas Brennan, family law attorney. Simple, clean, solid. Oddly comforting. One more thing, he added. What? If your wife realizes she's losing control of the situation, expect one of two things. I looked up. She'll either become extremely emotional or extremely aggressive. Which do you think she'll choose? Brennan gave a humorless smile. Usually both. By the time I left the office, the sun was already setting behind the downtown buildings. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. Not because things were fixed, they weren't, but because I finally had direction, a plan. I got into my truck and checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my wife, 2 voicemails, 1 text. Please stop doing this. I stared at the screen for a long moment before locking the phone again. Doing this. As if I had created the situation. As if hearing my wife mock me publicly and discovering months of manipulation was somehow an inconvenience for her. I started the engine. Halfway back to the motel, my phone rang again. Jake. I answered through Bluetooth. Hey. Mark told me what's going on, he said carefully. You all right? I glanced at the darkening highway ahead. Honestly, I don't know yet. Yeah, he sighed. Divorce messes with your head. You and your ex went through this kind of stuff too? Not exactly. But the manipulation? The rewriting history part? He laughed bitterly. That's almost standard. I tightened my grip on the wheel slightly. That's the part that bothers me most. What part? The fact that she was building a case against me while I was still trying to fix things. Jake was quiet for a second. Some people emotionally leave the relationship long before they physically leave it. That sentence lingered in my head, because deep down, I knew he was right. The coldness, the criticism, the emotional distance, none of it had started recently. I had just kept explaining it away because I loved her. "You got somewhere to stay?" Jake asked. "Motel for now." "That sucks." "Yeah." "Listen," he continued, "if you need help moving stuff later or just need somebody to grab a beer with, let me know." I smiled faintly for the first time all day. "Thanks, man. Seriously, don't isolate yourself too much. That's when your brain starts lying to you." After the call ended, I sat in silence the rest of the drive. By the time I reached the motel parking lot, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones again. I climbed out of the truck and froze. Her car was parked near my room. Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. She was sitting on the hood, arms crossed tightly against herself beneath the flickering neon motel sign, waiting for me. When she saw my truck pull in, she stood up immediately. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then she walked slowly toward me. Her eyes looked swollen from crying. But there was something else there, too. Fear. Real fear. "Why are you here?" I asked flatly. Her voice cracked immediately. "Because you won't talk to me." "I already told you to contact my lawyer." The second those words left my mouth, her expression changed. Not sadness, not guilt, panic. "You actually hired one?" There it was. The moment it became real for her, too. She stared at me under the harsh neon glow of the motel sign, her face pale with disbelief. "You actually hired a lawyer," she repeated quietly, like she still couldn't fully process it. "Yes." The single word landed between us like a slammed door. For a moment, she just stood there blinking at me. Then the tears came again. "Daniel, please don't do this." I let out a slow breath. "You already did this." "That's not fair." I laughed once, tired and hollow. "You know what's crazy?" I said. "You keep saying that. Every single time the consequences of your actions show up, suddenly nothing feels fair anymore." She wiped at her eyes angrily. "I made a mistake." "No," I replied calmly. "You made a plan." That hit her hard. Her entire posture stiffened. "You really think I'm some kind of villain now?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I think you stopped loving me a while ago," I said quietly. "And instead of being honest about it, you turned our marriage into a strategy." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Cars hissed past on the interstate nearby, while the motel ice machine rattled somewhere in the background. Finally, she shook her head. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under." I almost smiled at that. "Pressure?" "Yes," she snapped suddenly. "Do you have any idea what it feels like watching everyone around you move forward while we stayed stuck?" There it was, the truth, raw and ugly. I crossed my arms slowly. "So that's what this is really about?" "You were comfortable settling," she shot back. "You were fine working endless shifts forever and barely surviving while everyone else was building better lives." I stared at her in disbelief. "I was working those shifts for us, but it never changed anything." The words echoed through the parking lot. She immediately looked like she regretted saying them, but it was too late. I nodded slowly. "Wow." "Daniel, I didn't mean—" "No." I shook my head. "Actually, I'm glad you said it." She looked confused. "Why?" "Because for the first time, you're finally being honest." The silence between us became painfully heavy. I took a step closer.
You know what hurts the most?
I asked quietly. Not the divorce. Not even hearing you insult me to your friends. Her eyes stayed fixed on mine. It's realizing that while I was killing myself trying to build a life with you, I swallowed hard. You were standing there resenting me for not giving you a different one. Her face crumpled slightly. That's not entirely true, but it's true enough. She looked down at the pavement. For the first time since this started,
She had no argument ready. No excuse. No performance. Just silence.
I rubbed a hand over my face, exhaustion pressing down on me like weight. I loved you, I said softly. Completely. A tear rolled down her cheek. I know. No, I replied. I don't think you do. She finally looked back up. If you knew, you wouldn't have treated me like something embarrassing you outgrew. That one broke something in her expression. She started crying harder now, shoulders shaking beneath her jacket. I was angry, she whispered. At what? At my life. I nodded slowly. And somehow I became the target. You became the reminder, she admitted weakly. The honesty of that answer hurt more than anything else. Not because it was cruel, because it was real. I looked away toward the highway lights in the distance. For years, I had blamed myself for her unhappiness. Thought maybe if I worked harder, made more money, tried more, sacrificed more, things would improve. But standing there now, I finally understood something devastating. There was no amount of effort that could heal someone determined to be dissatisfied. You should go home, I said quietly. She wiped at her face. Home? She repeated bitterly. You mean the apartment you abandoned? I looked back at her sharply, and there it was again. That instinct to twist the knife, to rewrite reality, even now. You really can't help yourself, can you? What's that supposed to mean? You still need me to be the bad guy. That's not true. Then stop trying to make this my fault. Her breathing grew uneven again. I'm scared, she admitted suddenly. The anger drained out of me for a second. Not enough to soften, but enough to listen. Scared of what? Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. That I ruined my life. The parking lot fell silent around us, and strangely, that was the first honest thing she'd said all night. I studied her face carefully. This wasn't the confident woman laughing with wine in her hand anymore. This was someone watching the consequences of her choices become real in front of her. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. Emotional distance so complete, it almost startled me. I think, I said slowly, you ruined the version of your life where you still had someone willing to love you unconditionally. Fresh tears filled her eyes. That's cruel. No, I replied quietly. Cruel was listening to my wife tell a room full of people I wasn't good enough for her. She looked down again. I checked the time on my phone. I'm tired, I said. I have work tomorrow. You're seriously going back inside after this conversation? What else is there to say? She stared at me desperately. Tell me you never loved me then. Tell me this is easy for you. I laughed softly under my breath. Easy? I shook my head. You think this is easy? My throat tightened. I built my entire future around you. That finally silenced her. I continued quietly. I thought we were struggling together. I thought every overtime shift, every sacrifice, every stressful month was leading somewhere. I looked directly into her eyes. But you were already planning your exit while I was still trying to save us. A long silence followed. Then she whispered the words I think she should have said from the beginning. I'm sorry. And maybe she meant it this time. Maybe not. But it didn't matter anymore, because apologies only matter when trust still exists. Mine was already gone. I stepped past her and opened the motel room door. Before going inside, I paused one last time. "You know the worst part?" I said without turning around. She sniffed quietly behind me. "What?" "If you had just been honest with me months ago." I stared into the dim motel room. "I probably would have let you go peacefully." The silence behind me shattered. A broken sob escaped her throat, but I didn't turn around. This time, I went inside and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep much after that. Even after she finally drove away from the motel parking lot, I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the conversation in my head. Not because I missed her, because part of me still couldn't fully accept that this was real. 5 years together. And now we were standing under a flickering motel sign, talking through lawyers and emotional wreckage. Around midnight, rain started tapping softly against the windows. The sound filled the silence in the room, while headlights from passing cars slid across the ceiling in pale streaks. I eventually drifted off sometime near 2. The next morning, I woke to my phone vibrating again. For one terrible second, I thought it was her. It wasn't. It was Brennan. I sat up immediately and answered. "Morning," he said. "You busy?" "Heading to work soon." "Good. Quick update." I rubbed sleep from my eyes. "What's going on?" "Your wife's attorney contacted me this morning." Of course he did. "And?" Brennan paused briefly. "They're trying to slow things down." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means your wife panicked after realizing you retained counsel. Now they're floating the possibility of counseling, temporary separation agreements, emotional reconciliation, anything that delays formal filing." I leaned back against the headboard. Why? Because the moment legal proceedings officially begin, strategy becomes evidence. That woke me up fast. "You think they're worried?" "Oh, they're definitely worried," Brennan replied calmly, "especially if the recordings and witness statements hold up." I stared at the rain sliding down the motel window. For months, she had planned everything carefully. Now the plan was collapsing. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Nothing emotional, nothing impulsive. If she contacts you, keep responses brief and neutral." I almost laughed. "Neutral isn't exactly easy right now." "No," Brennan admitted, "but it's necessary." Before hanging up, he added one more thing. "And Daniel?" "Yeah?" People tend to reveal who they really are when they lose control of a situation. That sentence stayed in my head all day. Work helped. Not emotionally, but mechanically. The warehouse forced my brain to focus on something concrete. Schedules, shipments, problems with loading docks, forklift delays, simple things, real things. By lunchtime, the rain had stopped, leaving the entire city gray and damp beneath low clouds. I sat alone outside near the employee entrance, eating vending machine crackers and terrible coffee when Jake walked over. He handed me a soda without asking. "You look slightly less dead today," he said. "Appreciate the compliment." He leaned against the railing beside me. "So, how bad is it?" I thought about the motel, the lawyer, the manipulation, the conversations. Then I shrugged tiredly. "Worse than I expected." Jake nodded like he already understood. They usually save the worst parts for the end. I looked over at him. "How long did it take you to stop thinking about it every second?" He laughed quietly. "Longer than I wanted. Not exactly encouraging." "But eventually," he added, "you wake up one morning and realize you haven't checked your phone hoping they texted." I stared down at the concrete. "I don't even want her to text anymore." "That's a good sign." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. Jake looked at the screen. "You gonna answer?" I hesitated. Then I did. "Hello?" Silence for a second. Then her voice, soft, careful. "I know you blocked my number." I closed my eyes briefly. "What do you want?" "I just wanted to hear your voice." Jake quietly stood up and walked away, giving me privacy. "You shouldn't be calling me." "I know." "Then why are you?" Her breathing trembled slightly through the speaker. "Because everything feels like it's falling apart." The words should have made me feel vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. "It already fell apart," I said quietly. "No," she whispered. "It doesn't have to end like this." I looked out across the loading yard. Workers moved between trailers while storm clouds drifted slowly overhead. "You know what's strange?" I asked. "What?" "If you had fought this hard for our marriage 6 months ago," I swallowed slowly, "we probably wouldn't even be here." Silence, then a shaky breath. "I know. And honestly," I continued, "that's the part I can't forgive." Her voice cracked again. "I was unhappy." "I know." "I felt trapped." "I know." "I thought maybe if things changed financially—" "There it is again," I interrupted softly. "What?" "You keep talking about money like it explains everything." "That's not fair." "No," I said calmly. "What's not fair is making someone feel small because they spent years trying to provide for you." The line went silent. Then she whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. I was embarrassed. My chest tightened instantly. Embarrassed of what? Our life. That one hurt. Not in the explosive way the original comments had hurt. This was quieter, deeper, like finally hearing the truth your heart already suspected. I looked down at the cracked pavement beneath my boots. "You should have just left me honestly," I said. "I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed softly in disbelief. "You destroyed me slowly instead." She started crying again. And suddenly, I realized something important. This conversation wasn't helping either of us. It was just reopening wounds. "I have to go," I said quietly. "Daniel, wait." "I mean it. Please don't shut me out completely." I closed my eyes for a second. "You already left emotionally months ago," I said. "You just didn't tell me until now." Then I ended the call. For several seconds, I sat there staring at my phone afterward. Then, without overthinking it, I blocked that number too. Not out of anger, out of survival. Because every conversation with her pulled me backward into grief I was trying desperately to escape. Jake returned a minute later. "You okay?" I slipped the phone into my pocket. "Yeah." He studied me carefully. That sounded heavy. It was. He nodded toward the warehouse. "Come on, let's get back inside before Mark thinks we quit." As we walked back in, I glanced once through the open loading bay toward the cloudy afternoon sky. And for the first time since all this started, I felt something unfamiliar growing beneath the pain. Not happiness, not peace, but distance. The kind that comes right before healing begins. 3 days later, Brennan called me again. This time his tone sounded different, sharper. "Got a minute?" he asked. I was sitting in my truck outside the warehouse, finishing a gas station sandwich before my shift. "Yeah, what happened?" "You're going to want to sit down for this." That immediately put me on edge. "I am sitting." A pause. "Your wife's attorney sent over preliminary financial disclosures this morning." I frowned. "Okay." "There are transactions missing." I straightened slightly. "What kind of transactions?" "Large ones." Cold unease slid into my stomach. How large? Over the last 4 months, approximately $11,000 moved out of the joint account in smaller transfers.
I blinked hard. What?
Brennan continued calmly. Most of them were structured carefully, small enough not to draw immediate attention. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Online transfers, cash withdrawals. I stared through the windshield at the warehouse entrance while workers clocked in around me. That's impossible. No, Brennan replied quietly. It's very possible. My mind started racing immediately. Rent, utilities, groceries, overtime. I had been so busy surviving that I barely checked anything besides whether the bills were paid. She moved money? I asked slowly. Looks that way. I leaned back heavily in the seat. Where did it go? That's the interesting part. Papers shuffled on his end of the line. Some transfers went into an account we didn't previously know existed. I felt physically sick. Her account? Likely. I rubbed a hand across my face. For a long moment, I couldn't even speak. Not because of the money itself. Because every new detail made the marriage feel more fake, more calculated. How bad is this legally? I finally asked. For her? Potentially very bad. That got my attention. Why? Because hidden assets during divorce proceedings are a serious issue. Brennan paused. Especially if she intended to conceal them. I stared blankly ahead. Then another thought hit me. Does she know you found it? Oh, she knows now. Something in Brennan's voice almost sounded amused. And? Her attorney suddenly became much more interested in amicable resolution. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course. Daniel, Brennan said carefully, I'm going to ask you something important. I need a truthful answer. Okay. Did you ever suspect infidelity? The question hit like a brick. I sat completely still. No, I answered slowly. Not seriously. But, I swallowed hard. She became distant this past year, protective of her phone, more nights out with friends. But I thought, my voice trailed off. You thought the marriage was struggling, Brennan finished. Yeah, another pause. We don't have evidence of cheating, he said carefully, but hidden finances combined with strategic divorce planning sometimes overlap with other situations. I closed my eyes. I didn't even want to think about it. The humiliation I overheard that night had already ripped something open inside me. I wasn't sure I could handle discovering there had been someone else, too. Don't spiral yet, Brennan added quickly. Focus on facts, not assumptions. Easy for him to say. After the call ended, I sat motionless in the truck for almost 5 full minutes. Then my phone buzzed again. Monica. I answered immediately. You heard? She asked. You knew about the money? A long silence answered me before she spoke. Not exactly. Monica. I knew she was hiding something financially, she admitted quietly. I just didn't know how much. Anger flared instantly. You should have told me. I know. You let me sit there killing myself with overtime while she secretly moved money? Her voice cracked immediately. I'm sorry. I gripped the steering wheel harder. She said it was emergency savings at first. Then later, Monica hesitated. Later what? She started calling it her Freedom Fund. That phrase hit me harder than almost anything else so far. Freedom Fund. While I was working double shifts, trying to hold our life together, she had quietly been building an escape plan behind my back. I laughed once under my breath. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. You still there? Monica asked carefully. Yeah. She convinced herself you were going to hold her back forever, Monica whispered. I think she genuinely believed she deserved some completely different life. I stared out at the gray morning sky. And now? Silence. Then, I don't think she expected consequences. That part was probably true. People like my wife always believed they'd land safely somehow, that charm would save them, that narratives would protect them, that somebody else would absorb the damage. But reality doesn't care about narratives. Eventually, bills come due, emotionally, financially, personally. I have to go, I said quietly. Daniel. What? I really am sorry. I believed her. Oddly enough, that almost made it worse. The rest of the day felt like moving through water. Everything slowed down. Every conversation sounded distant. Even work couldn't distract me anymore. By the end of my shift, I finally checked my personal email during break. There were 3 new messages from Brennan. Attached documents, financial summaries, transfer histories, highlighted withdrawals. I opened the first file. And there it was. Line after line, transfer after transfer, money disappearing quietly for months, small enough individually to avoid panic, large enough together to tell the truth. My stomach turned. There was even one withdrawal on my birthday weekend. I remembered that weekend perfectly. She had told me we needed to cut back financially. Meanwhile, she transferred $800 into a hidden account 2 days earlier. I shut my eyes. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was layered, careful, systematic. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was her. Not a call, a text from yet another unknown number. I didn't steal from you. I stared at the screen. Then another message arrived immediately after. I was protecting myself. I read that sentence 3 times. Protecting herself. As if I had been the threat. As if the man exhausting himself to support their life together was somehow dangerous. For several seconds, anger surged hot in my chest again. But then something unexpected happened. The anger faded, and in its place came clarity. Complete clarity. Because that message told me everything I still needed to know about her. Even now. Even after everything collapsed. She still saw herself as the victim of her own choices. I typed slowly. No. You were preparing to leave while pretending we still had a marriage. 3 dots appeared instantly, then vanished, then appeared again. Finally, her response came through. I never meant for this to happen. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I locked my phone without replying. Because for the first time since all this started, I understood something important. Intentions stop mattering once betrayal becomes a pattern. 2 weeks later, the divorce stopped feeling like a crisis and started feeling like a process. Cold, structured, paperwork instead of emotions, which, honestly, was easier to survive. Brennan moved fast, faster than her side expected. Every hidden transfer he uncovered weakened her position further. By the 2nd week, her attorney had stopped talking about reconciliation completely. Now, it was all negotiation. Assets, debt, lease termination, account disclosures, everything reduced to numbers on documents. Funny how 5 years of marriage eventually fit into folders and signatures. I had moved out of the motel by then. Not because life was improving dramatically, just because Brennan insisted I establish stable housing before proceedings advanced further. So I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment 15 minutes from the warehouse. Cheap carpet, thin walls, tiny kitchen, but it was quiet. More importantly, it was mine. The first night there, I sat on the floor eating takeout Chinese food from the carton because I didn't own a dining table yet. And for the first time in months, I realized something strange. I could breathe in my own space without tension sitting in my chest. No criticism, no cold silence, no feeling like I was constantly disappointing someone. Just peace. It felt unfamiliar, but good. 3 days after moving in, Brennan called with another update.
"You available Thursday morning?" he asked.
Why? Settlement conference. I leaned back in my desk chair at work. She agreed? She doesn't have much choice anymore. That surprised me slightly. What changed? A brief pause. Rachel gave a statement. I blinked. She what? She confirmed the conversation from the night you left. Specifically, the comments about you being beneath her and the laughter afterward. I stared across the warehouse floor.
Why would she do that?
Probably because she has a conscience. I rubbed my jaw slowly. And Monica? Also cooperating. That one hit differently. Not emotionally, just strangely.
The entire friend group my wife once controlled was slowly pulling away from her.
Truth has a way of isolating people who rely too heavily on manipulation. She's furious about it, Brennan added casually. I can imagine. No, he said dryly, you probably can't. That almost made me laugh. Almost. Thursday morning arrived gray and rainy, perfect divorce weather. Brennan's office conference room felt colder than usual.
A long wooden table separated both legal teams while coffee sat untouched near the center.
And then she walked in. For a second, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished appearance she always maintained so carefully. No expensive makeup, no confident posture, no perfectly styled hair. She looked exhausted, smaller somehow, like the weight of the past few weeks had finally reached her. When her eyes met mine, something flickered across her face. Regret. Real regret this time. But regret and repair are not the same thing. She sat across from me without speaking. Her attorney opened a folder immediately. Given recent developments, he began carefully, my client would prefer to reach a fair and efficient resolution. Translation. They knew they were losing leverage. Brennan stayed calm beside me. We're listening. The next 2 hours felt surreal. People discussed my marriage like a business contract. Who keeps what? Who pays what?
Who owes what?
At one point, her attorney attempted to argue that the hidden account had been personal emergency savings. Brennan shut that down immediately. Emergency savings funded through concealed marital transfers while planning divorce proceedings? He asked flatly. That argument will not survive court review. Silence. Her attorney adjusted his glasses. My wife stared at the table the entire time. Eventually, they moved on. In the end, the agreement was simple.
She kept her car and her personal debt. I kept my truck and retirement account.
Remaining joint funds would be split after documented reimbursement adjustments. No alimony. No extended legal battle. Clean separation. Honestly, it was the best outcome I could have hoped for. When the meeting finally ended, Brennan stepped outside to take a call while her attorney gathered papers near the door. For the first time in weeks, my wife and I were briefly alone. Neither of us spoke at first. Rain tapped softly against the office windows. Then quietly, without looking at me, she asked, "Do you hate me?" I leaned back slightly in the chair. That question deserved honesty. "No," I answered after a moment.
That surprised her enough to finally look up.
"Really?"
I did, for a little while. Her eyes lowered again.
"But hate takes energy," I continued quietly. "And honestly, I'm just tired." Something about that answer seemed to hurt her more than anger would have. She swallowed hard. "I never thought things would end like this." I almost smiled sadly. Neither did I. A long silence followed. Then she whispered, "I really did love you once." That one landed deep because I believed her. And somehow, that made everything even sadder. "I know," I said softly. Tears filled her eyes instantly. I don't think I'm a terrible person. I thought carefully before answering. I think you became someone willing to justify hurting another person if it meant escaping your own unhappiness. She flinched slightly. But no, I added quietly. I don't think you're evil. The tears finally spilled over. I don't even recognize myself anymore. For a second, I almost reached across the table instinctively. 5 years of habit, 5 years of wanting to comfort her. But I stopped myself. That wasn't my role anymore. You should probably figure out who you are before trying to build another life, I said gently. She nodded faintly. Then, after a long pause, Are you happier now? I thought about my apartment, the silence, the relief, the absence of constant emotional exhaustion. Then, strangely, I thought about Sarah from accounting. Not romantically, not yet. Just the memory of a conversation we'd had in the break room earlier that week, where she made me laugh for the first time in months. I think, I said slowly, I'm becoming happier. That answer broke something in her expression, because she finally understood the one thing she never expected. I was going to survive this. Without her. Maybe even better than before. Brennan returned a moment later, ending the conversation. We both stood. Her attorney handed over final preliminary paperwork. As everyone prepared to leave, she looked at me one last time. I really am sorry, Daniel. This time, there was no manipulation in her voice, no strategy, no performance, just grief. I nodded once. I know. Then I walked away. And for the first time since that night in the living room, I didn't look back. Life settled into something quieter after the settlement conference. Not easier, not magically fixed, just quieter. And after months of emotional chaos, quiet felt like oxygen. The divorce paperwork still needed final processing, but the war part was mostly over. Brennan handled the remaining legal details while I focused on rebuilding the small pieces of my life, one at a time. Work, sleep, bills, gym, repeat. Simple routines became anchors. The apartment slowly started looking less temporary, too. A couch from Facebook Marketplace, cheap coffee table, actual dishes instead of takeout containers. One Friday evening, I stood in the kitchen assembling a bookshelf while music played softly from my phone. Halfway through tightening one of the screws, I realized something strange. I hadn't thought about her all day. Not once. The realization hit me so suddenly, I just stood there holding the screwdriver in silence. Healing, apparently, happens very quietly. Sarah started appearing more often around that time. At first, it was small things. Conversations during lunch breaks, coffee runs before shifts, jokes exchanged across the accounting counter. Easy interactions, no pressure, no games. And honestly, that mattered more than anything. One afternoon, she caught me staring blankly at a spreadsheet during break. "You look emotionally attacked by numbers," she said. I laughed before I could stop myself. Probably because I am. She smiled and slid into the chair across from me. "You doing okay today?" There was something different about the way she asked that question. Not casual, intentional. Like she actually cared about the answer. "Yeah," I said honestly. "Better than I was." "That's good." We sat quietly for a second before she tilted her head slightly. "For what it's worth," she said carefully, "people around here noticed what happened." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Your divorce." I looked away instinctively. Embarrassment still lingered in places I didn't expect. Sarah noticed immediately. "Hey," she said softly, "you don't need to look ashamed." "I'm not ashamed." "You are a little." I sighed quietly because she wasn't wrong. She folded her arms on the table. You know what people actually say about you? I raised an eyebrow. That you worked yourself half to death trying to support someone who didn't appreciate it. That landed harder than I expected. Because for so long, I had only heard the opposite. Not ambitious enough, not successful enough, not exciting enough. Sarah looked at me carefully. Somebody treating you badly doesn't automatically mean you failed. I stared at her for a moment, then looked down at the spreadsheet again, mostly because I suddenly didn't know where else to look. You're very direct, I muttered. She grinned slightly. Occupational hazard. Accounting makes people emotionally observant? No, she said, but surviving bad relationships does. That made me glance back up. There was a story there, I could tell. But unlike my ex-wife, Sarah didn't seem interested in turning pain into performance. She simply understood. And somehow, that felt comforting. 2 weeks later, the divorce officially finalized. Just like that. 5 years legally ended in less than 20 minutes. Brennan called me around noon. "It's done," he said simply. I sat quietly in the warehouse break room while those words settled over me. Done. No dramatic courtroom battle, no screaming, no revenge, just signatures, paperwork, an ending. "How do you feel?" Brennan asked. I thought about it honestly. Lighter. He laughed softly. That's usually a good sign. After we hung up, I expected some massive emotional collapse, grief, anger, something. Instead, I mostly felt calm. Not happy, but calm. Like a storm had finally passed. That evening, I drove home with the windows down for the first time in months. Warm air filled the truck, while sunset painted the sky orange above the highway. When I got to my apartment, there was an envelope sitting outside my door. No return address. I already knew who it was from before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter, 3 pages. I almost threw it away immediately. Instead, I sat down on the couch and read. "Daniel, I know I probably don't deserve for you to even read this, but I needed to say these things somewhere. First, I am sorry. Not just for that night. For all of it. For the lying, the resentment, the manipulation, the way I slowly turned our marriage into something toxic while blaming you for it. You were right about something I didn't want to admit before. I emotionally left long before I physically did. And instead of being honest, I made you carry the weight of my unhappiness until I barely recognized myself anymore. There were parts of the letter stained slightly from tears. I kept reading. You loved me better than I loved myself at times, and instead of appreciating that, I started resenting you for needing so little to be happy. I kept chasing some imaginary version of life where everything looked more successful, more exciting, more impressive. And somewhere along the way, I started treating you like evidence of what I thought I was missing, instead of the person who stood beside me through everything. My chest tightened slowly. Not because I wanted her back, because this was probably the most honest she'd been in years. The letter continued. I don't expect forgiveness, and I know I destroyed any future we had together, but I need you to know something anyway. None of this happened because you weren't enough. It happened because I stopped appreciating what I already had. I had to stop reading for a minute after that. The apartment sat completely silent around me. Eventually, I looked down at the final paragraph. I hope someday someone loves you the way you deserved to be loved all along. And I hope by then you're able to believe you deserve it. Goodbye, Daniel. I sat there for a long time after finishing. The anger I once carried toward her felt very far away now. All that remained was sadness. Not for the marriage itself, for the people we used to be before resentment hollowed everything out. My phone buzzed suddenly, pulling me back into the present. A text from Sarah. How does celebratory coffee sound tomorrow? I stared at the message, then slowly smiled for the first time all night. Maybe endings weren't always just endings. Maybe sometimes they were space being cleared for something healthier to finally begin. I typed back, "Yeah, I'd like that." A year later, I stood on the balcony of the condo Sarah and I had just moved into, watching the city lights flicker beneath the evening sky. Warm wind drifted through the open glass doors behind me, while music played softly somewhere inside. It still amazed me sometimes how different peace felt from chaos. Not louder, not more exciting, just steadier, real. Inside, Sarah was laughing at something Mark had said while helping us unpack boxes in the living room. Jake was there too, arguing about where the television should go like it was a life or death decision. Normal moments. Healthy moments. The kind I used to think only happened to other people. Sarah stepped onto the balcony carrying 2 glasses of wine. "You disappeared," she said, handing me one. "Just thinking. That dangerous, huh?" I smiled faintly. "Sometimes." She leaned beside me against the railing. For a while we simply stood there quietly. Comfortable silence, no tension hidden underneath it, no fear of saying the wrong thing, no emotional exhaustion waiting around the corner. Just calm. After a minute, Sarah glanced sideways at me. "You okay?" I looked out across the skyline. "Yeah," I said honestly. "Actually, yeah." And I meant it. Not the forced kind of okay people say to survive conversations. Real okay. The kind built slowly after pain finally stops controlling your life. Sarah rested her head lightly against my shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "you still get that look sometimes." "What look?" "Like you're waiting for everything to fall apart." That hit closer than I expected. Because she was right. Even after everything improved, part of me still braced for disaster. Like happiness was temporary. Like stability couldn't fully be trusted. "I'm working on it," I admitted quietly. "I know." That was another thing about Sarah. She never tried to fix me. She just stayed. Patiently. Consistently. And somehow that healed more than dramatic words ever could. Inside the apartment, Jake yelled, "If this couch collapses, I want everyone here to know it wasn't my idea." Sarah laughed softly. Then her expression turned more serious again. "Do you regret it?" she asked. I looked at her. "The divorce?" She nodded. I thought about that carefully. About the motel, the betrayal, the legal meetings, the nights spent questioning my worth. Then I thought about the man I had become afterward. Stronger, calmer, more honest with himself. "No," I said finally. Not because it hadn't hurt, it had nearly destroyed me, but because staying in that marriage would have destroyed me slowly, and there's a difference. Sarah squeezed my hand gently. "You know," she said, "most people never realize they deserve better until it's too late." I smiled faintly. I almost didn't. A comfortable silence settled between us again. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out automatically. Unknown number. For a second, my chest tightened from old habit. Sarah noticed immediately. "You don't have to answer that." I stared at the screen. A year ago, unknown numbers meant chaos, manipulation, pain. But not anymore. I declined the call without a second thought and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Sarah smiled slightly. That looked healthy. Felt healthy. And strangely, it did. Later that night, after everyone left, Sarah fell asleep beside me on the couch, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. Her hand rested lightly against my arm while the television played quietly in the background. I looked around the apartment slowly. The framed photos waiting to be hung, the coffee mugs in the kitchen, the soft city glow through the windows. A life. Not perfect, but honest. And for the first time in years, I finally understood something important. Love was never supposed to feel like proving your worth every single day. It wasn't supposed to leave you anxious, exhausted, or constantly afraid of failing someone's impossible expectations. Real love felt safe, not boring, safe. There's a difference. I looked down at Sarah sleeping peacefully beside me and smiled to myself. Then I thought briefly about that night a year ago. Walking into my apartment, hearing my wife laugh while telling her friends I wasn't good enough anymore. At the time, it felt like the worst moment of my life. But it wasn't. It was the moment my old life ended, and the moment my real one finally began. I turned off the television carefully, wrapped a blanket over Sarah, and closed my eyes beside her. Outside, the city kept moving. But for the first time in a very long time, I was exactly where I belonged.